Barron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require the Secretary of State to report on means of compelling tobacco companies to pay the cost of smoking cessation services, to make provisions about the advertising and marketing of products that are alternatives to tobacco, to require tobacco companies to publish information about their activities in relation to such products, and to create an offence of selling tobacco without a licence. In 1990, almost one-third of adults in Great Britain smoked. The most recent figures show that this has almost halved. Since then, the prevalence rate in the UK now is 15.8%. The government's ambition set out in the Tobacco Control Plan last year is to reach 12% or less by 2022, with a longer term of achieving a 5% prevalence rate. Despite the relative success, the UK still has 7.6 million smokers, which means more than 200 people a day still die from smoking-related illnesses that could have been prevented. And smoking is estimated to cost our economy in excess of £11 billion a year. Budgets for stop smoking services were cut in half of the local authorities that provide them in 2017. Separately, the number of smokers using NHS stop smoking services has decreased to 40,000 in 2016 from a peak of 100,000 in 2011. This bill is aiming to highlight the possibility of what a package of measures could do to accelerate the decline in smoking prevalence. At the heart of this new approach would be the creation of a new fund that would primarily be used to supplement local authorities' cessation expenditure, while simultaneously encouraging cigarette companies to shift away from the combustible products to less harmful alternatives. I know many are very wary of these products and the fact that many are produced or funded by tobacco companies, but we must recognise that the tobacco companies have been extremely dishonest in the past about the harms of smoking. Tobacco companies have made a fortune selling cigarettes, and they have got this country into the mess it's in now, and I believe it's only right that they get us out of it. And we should and must follow the simple principle of the polluter pays. They have the resources and customer base to help smoking cessation tools to get straight to the people that need them most. The proposed Tobacco Transitional Fund would work in a similar way to the Carbonated Drinks Industry Fund in providing incentives for both individual consumers and the tobacco industry to change their behaviour. Over the next decade or so, such a fund could raise up to £1 billion that would be spent primarily on cessation services in the areas with the highest smoking prevalence. The fund would be paid for by the major tobacco companies according to their market share. The fund would remain at the same level regardless of the number of smokers in the UK, thereby making it increasingly costly for any company that wished to continue selling cigarettes as the number of smokers decline. The vast majority of this fund would be passed directly to local authorities to fund cessation service, with a particular focus on those with the highest rates of prevalence. The fund could also provide extra ring-fence money to Public Health England to promote switching by funding independent research with the aim of promoting popular understanding and awareness of non-combustible products. The final element of this fund would be to support trading standards in their ongoing efforts to combat illicit trade in combustible tobacco, with the investment based on HMRC's assessment of local needs and impact. The fund would need a robust and independent governance structure to oversee spending by the Department of Health and Social Care, Public Health England and local authorities. It would also require accurate reporting by the manufacturers of their efforts to switch consumers. This could include publication of sales data and research and development spend. The bill would also need to find a way to encourage more smokers to switch. It is apparent that the Public Health England endorsement that e-cigarettes are 95% safer than smoking has been insufficient in persuading smokers that the alternatives are safer. In a survey last year, 26% of adults thought e-cigarettes were as harmful or more harmful than smoking. and that's up from 7% in 2013. We also need a new approach to how people receive the required information and support to quit. That must include a new approach to the rules around advertisements. And we must recognise that e-cigarettes and other non-combustible products are very different to the products that tobacco companies are better known for. It seems ridiculous that it's possible to advertise these products on outdoor billboards, but you cannot provide the same information using the internet, even with restrictions to limit its audience to adults only. Manufacturers of reduced harm products would adhere to a marketing code similar to that which applies to other highly regulated products, such as alcohol. The Advertising Standards Authority would monitor and enforce the code. We must also look at reducing access to harmful tobacco products that are still being sold. At the moment, there is no requirement in England to have a licence or register with a local authority in order to sell tobacco. Scotland has a model that requires registration, which is relatively simple to complete and free for retailers, so it doesn't hit small businesses. Introducing a register in England would strengthen tobacco control, making it a criminal offence to sell tobacco without being registered. And if retailers sell illicit tobacco or sell to minors, they could then be struck off the register altogether. I truly believe that if industry is willing to commit to a future based around e-cigarettes and other reduced harm products, we should take them up on the offer and allow government and local authorities to partner with them for the financial and technical help needed to help smokers quit. I am sure that we would all agree that what we want is a smoke-free society as soon as possible. We on these benches, on both sides, even some tobacco companies are now saying this as well. So the government could not ask for a better opportunity. The challenge is now to make sure that the reality lives up to those ambitions, and I believe the measures I have set out gives us the best opportunity to do this, and I commend the bill to the House.
The question is that the right honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. Mr. Philip Davies.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. And to be clear, I rise to oppose the bill, but it's not my intention to divide the House on this issue, and I don't intend to speak for long either, as I know many honourable members are wanting to speak on the budget debate. But I do think it's important that the bill being proposed by the right honourable gentleman is put into some context. I certainly commend the right honourable gentleman for his dogged determination with which he works to reduce the number of people who smoke. But my fear is that with this particular bill, the points he raises are either unwelcome or largely not necessary. Yesterday, the Chancellor again increased the tax on tobacco products by a rate above that of inflation. On some products, that means that the tax is now more than 90% of the retail price. The excise revenue raised from tobacco products in the UK is around £12 billion a year, and that doesn't include VAT. And each year the government increases the level further above inflation. It was supposedly Louis XIV's finance minister, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, who famously said that the art of levying taxes is to pluck the goose so as to get the maximum amount of feathers with the minimum amount of hissing. And that is the balancing act that the government has to perform every year with duties including tobacco duty. Except in this case, Mr. Speaker, the only hissing that we can hear is the sound of the criminal gangs who smuggle illegal tobacco into this country, rubbing their hands with glee. I actually think, Mr. Speaker, that if the government thought they could raise any more money from the tobacco industry, then they would already be doing it. The right honourable gentleman proposes that this House require the Secretary of State to report on how he is making the tobacco industry pay for smoking cessation services. One is tempted to ask how much more than £12 billion he wants or expects. But of course what he is calling for is some kind of levy on tobacco, the same thing that he and a few others have repeatedly asked this and previous governments about in this House. Indeed, I think the question was only recently asked by the honourable member for York Central just last month. So clearly, Mr. Speaker, members of this House are having no difficulty holding the government to account on this issue, and I certainly don't think we need a new bill to help us. The honourable member for York Central received the same answer in September that the government has given many times before, that a levy would be passed on to consumers and so would have the same effect as a duty increase, which is happening anyway, except that a levy would complicate the tax system, increase the administrative burden on HMRC and create uncertainty for consumers and businesses. It was a bad idea in 2016 when the Right Honourable Gentleman presented a petition to the House about it. It was a bad idea last month, and it's still a bad idea today, Mr Speaker. The Right Honourable Gentleman keeps banging the drum, but perhaps it's time to change the tune. On the subject of the advertising and promotion of alternatives to smoking, products such as e-cigarettes, he will be aware that the government has already committed to examine how it can better support smokers with clear information after we leave the EU, and therefore once we are no longer held back by the outdated thinking of this part of the EU's Tobacco Products Directive. Yet another benefit from leaving the EU, Mr Speaker. The best thing a smoker can do, of course, is to quit smoking altogether. But it's obvious that those who can't, or don't want to, deserve to be told the truth about e-cigarettes and other products which could offer them a less harmful alternative. At present, the law prevents manufacturers from giving them that information, but I hope that once we leave the EU, we will be able to change that. But not all parts of the Tobacco Products Directive are bad. Some offer some real protections to consumers and deserve to be preserved after we leave the EU. For example, the Right Honourable Gentleman will be aware that the Tobacco Products Directive requires manufacturers and importers of e-cigarettes and novel tobacco products to already share with the government any market research information they hold on those products when they place them on the public register of legal products. This seems to me to be a very proper measure which allows the government to already monitor what is happening in this marketplace. So as long as this measure remains in place after we leave the EU, it strikes me that this is another part of his proposed bill that is simply not needed. And finally, Mr Speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman asks that a tobacco licensing scheme be introduced with tough penalties. But again, this simply isn't needed. The government is already at work implementing a Europe-wide system to track and trace tobacco products, which will require that manufacturers, importers, wholesalers and retailers are all registered on a public database as economic operators in order to handle tobacco. This is a de facto licensing scheme anyway, and does everything that is needed to support trading standards enforcement against those who are unscrupulous criminals who sell smuggled tobacco or sell tobacco to children. And with a bit of luck, we would see a few more of them behind bars as a result. Certainly, I would hope that anyone caught committing such crimes will be automatically struck off the list and so rendered unable to legally handle tobacco. So, as I said at the start, Mr Speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman deserves our respect for his tireless and relentless work to reduce smoking. And although it's not my intention to divide the House, I thought it's important to put on record the context of his proposed bill and point out that the measures contained within it are either unwelcome or, more often, not necessary.
Thank you. Order. The question is that the Right Honourable Member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Norman Lamb, Mark Palsey, Liz Kendall, Jess Phillips, Crispin Blunt, Charles Walker, Kevin Jones, Adam Afree, Antonio Antonazzi.
And myself. Well done. Never forget thyself. Sir Kevin Barron.
Yeah. Tobacco bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 23rd of November.
Friday the 23rd of November. Thank you.
Point of order.
Order. Point of order, Mr. Chris Bryant.
So we've just agreed that that bill is going to be read on the 23rd of November, which, theoretically, there are, unfortunately, 150 private members' bills that are going to be considered on that day. 150, I suspect, will not be reached. Two of them are having... 148 of them, rather, will not be reached, are now 149. The government has to, under our standing orders, to provide us 13 days in a session for private members' bills. The government guaranteed that it would provide additional days in this session because it's a 2-year session. They're considering having a 2-year session next time as well. Would it not be a good idea if they announced some additional days for private members' bills today, for instance?
I'm receiving... The clerk has consulted his scholarly cranium, on the strength of which, and it's a very considerable strength, he was about to proffer me some advice, to which, if I can hear it, I will listen attentively. But let's hear... I do have a view, in any case, on what the honourable gentleman has said, but let's just hear the honourable gentleman, point of order, if it's on the same matter. Mr. Philip Davies.
On that very point, Mr. Speaker, am I not right in thinking that the standing orders state that there shall be 13 sitting days in a session of Parliament for private members' bills? Not that there will be a minimum of, but that there shall be 13 days. And therefore, wouldn't it be quite proper for that session just to have those 13 days, as that's what the standing orders quite clearly said?
Well, conformity with standing orders is a very good starting point. The reality is that in the interpretation of standing orders, it is possible for there to be differences of opinion. Recalling the sequence of events earlier in this Parliament, my recollection was that the government had nodded its recognition of the fact that a 2-year session had an implication for opposition days and also for private members' bills, and that therefore there would need to be an explicit commitment to guarantee the requisite number of days. I'm not aware that that has yet happened, and that, I think, is at the heart of the honourable gentleman's point of order. If he's asking me, do I think it would be a good idea for there to be an announcement, well, it might very well be, and if there were to be such an announcement, it would probably be a good idea for it to be sooner rather than later, if for no other or better reason than it would mean that the honourable gentleman didn't have to exercise his knee muscles again by rising to his feet to raise this perfectly legitimate point. I think we will leave it there for now.